In the remote reaches of Wyoming's Bighorn Mountains, where winter's grip turns everything to crystal and silence, an old story of redemption was about to unfold. Jack Hawthorne had lived alone for so long that solitude had become his only companion. His weathered hands knew the rhythm of ranch work, but his heart had forgotten the warmth of human connection. Until that fateful December morning, when he found her half buried in the snow. Sarah Winters, a schoolteacher who'd lost her way. As he carried her unconscious form back to his cabin, neither of them could have known that this moment would change everything. Could a man who'd walled himself off from the world for 20 years learn to trust again? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn broke over the Bighorn Mountains with the kind of silence that only December could bring. Jack Hawthorne's calloused fingers reached for his father's pocket watch on the bedside table. 4:30 a.m., same as every morning for the past 20 years. The watch's gold case had long since lost its shine, but its steady tick marked time just as faithfully as the day his father had pressed it into his palm, saying, "A ranch ain't gonna run itself, son." The floorboards creaked beneath his boots as he made his way to the kitchen. Every step, every morning ritual was as familiar as breathing. Coffee grounds into the percolator, 2 scoops, never more. The routine hadn't changed since Claire passed, and he preferred it that way. Routine meant safety. Routine meant not having to think about the empty chair across the table. Outside, his breath clouded in the pre-dawn air as he trudged through knee-deep snow toward the barn. The mercury had dropped well below zero overnight, and the wind carried that special kind of bite that warned of worse weather coming. His Belgian draft horses Buck and Duke nickered softly as he pushed open the heavy wooden doors. "Morning. Boys," he muttered, reaching for the hay. The horses were his only conversation partners these days, and that suited him just fine. They didn't ask questions, didn't expect him to be anything other than what he was, a man who'd chosen solitude over the messy business of human connection. The morning chores flowed one into another, feeding the horses, breaking ice in the water. Troughs, checking on the handful of cattle he kept in the lower pasture. 20 years ago, the Triple H Ranch had been one of the largest operations in the county. Now, it was just him and enough livestock to keep busy. He didn't need more. As he worked, his father's watch kept time in his pocket, its weight a constant reminder of everything he'd inherited and everything he'd lost. The ranch had been in the Hawthorne family for 4 generations. His great-grandfather had built the main house with his own hands, hauling timber down from the high country. The barn still bore his grandfather's initials carved into the central beam, and somewhere in the study, gathering dust, was the photograph of his father teaching him to ride, both of them grinning at Claire behind the camera. Claire. Even after all these years, thinking her name was like pressing on a bruise, a dull ache that never quite went away. She loved this place as much as he did, had seen past its rough edges to the beauty hidden in every corner. "It's like a fairy tale up here," she'd said that first winter, watching snow dust the pine trees like powdered sugar. She'd filled the house with warmth and laughter, had planted the flower beds that now lay dormant under the snow. The radio in the kitchen crackled with the morning weather report as he stomped snow from his boots. "Major storm system moving in from the northwest," the announcer's voice warned through the static. "Expect heavy snowfall and dangerous conditions over the next 48 hours. All residents advised to prepare for potential isolation." Jack glanced out the window at the heavy grey clouds gathering over the mountains. He had enough supplies to last months if needed. One advantage of living like a hermit was always being prepared for isolation. The town was 15 miles away, and he only made the trip when absolutely necessary. The locals had learned years ago not to expect social calls from Jack Hawthorne. The day wore on, each hour marked by the steady tick of his father's watch. As the wind picked up, he double-checked the barn doors, laid in extra hay for the horses, and brought in more firewood than he probably needed. The last thing he needed was to run out during what was shaping up to be a serious storm. By late afternoon, the first heavy flakes were falling. Jack sat in his father's old leather armchair, a cup of coffee cooling on the side table, and watched the world disappear behind a curtain of white. In the gathering darkness, his reflection in the window looked like a ghost. Grey hair, lined face, eyes that had seen enough of life to know better than to expect anything from it. The pocket watch ticked in his hand, marking another day's end. Tomorrow would be the same, and the day after that. That was the way he liked it. That was the way it had to be. But somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that no man was meant to live forever in winter, that even the longest night had to give way to dawn. He pushed the thought away, closed the watch with a decisive snap, and prepared for another solitary night as the storm howled against his windows, unaware that fate was about to force its way through his carefully constructed defenses. The storm hit with a fury that even Jack's decades in the mountains hadn't prepared him for. By morning, the wind howled like a wounded animal, and the snow fell so thick he could barely see the barn from his kitchen window. He'd just finished his morning coffee when something caught his eye, a flash of color against the endless white, there and gone so quickly he might have imagined it. But 20 years of ranching had taught him to trust his instincts. He grabbed his heavy coat and a rope from the mudroom, muscle memory from years of winter rescues taking over. The bitter cold hit him like a physical blow as he stepped outside, the wind driving needles of ice into any exposed skin. That's when he saw it again, a splash of deep blue against the snow, maybe 50 yards past his property line. His steps were careful but urgent. In weather like this, hesitation could be fatal. As he drew closer, the blue shape resolved itself into a coat, and inside it, a woman. She lay half buried in the snow, her face pale as the drifts around her. A delicate silver locket hung around her neck, crusted with ice. Her dark hair was frozen in tendrils around her face, and her lips had taken on a dangerous bluish tinge. But when Jack pressed 2 fingers to her neck, he found a pulse, weak but steady. "Ma'am?" His voice sounded strange in his ears, rusty from disuse. "Can you hear me?" No response, but she was breathing. That was something. Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, but the wind fought him every step of the way back to the house. Her skin was like ice against his chest, and somewhere in the back of his mind, Claire's voice whispered, "Don't you dare let her die, Jack Hawthorne." Inside, he laid her gently on the couch near the fireplace, already building the fire higher. His first aid training from his army days kicked in. Remove wet clothes, check for frostbite, raise core temperature gradually. He worked methodically, trying not to think about how long it had been since he'd touched another human being. As he wrapped her in warm blankets, her locket caught the firelight. It had come open in the move, revealing a small photograph of an older couple. Her parents, he guessed. Something about their smiling faces made his chest tight. He closed the locket carefully and continued his work. Hours passed. He kept the fire blazing, checked her pulse regularly, and tried not to think about how this unconscious stranger had already disrupted 20 years of carefully maintained solitude. Outside, the storm raged on, as if determined to keep her there. It was near dusk when she finally stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, brown, he noticed, like autumn leaves, and focused slowly on his face. For a moment they just stared at each other. Then she tried to speak, her voice barely a whisper. "Where?" "Triple H Ranch," he said, his own voice still rough. "Found you in the snow. Storm's got us trapped for now." He paused, then added, "I'm Jack Hawthorne." "Sarah," she managed. "Sarah Winters." A slight smile touched her lips. "Appropriate name for today, I suppose." Despite himself, Jack felt the corner of his mouth twitch. "There's soup warming on the stove. Think you can manage some?" She nodded weakly, and he helped her sit up, acutely aware of how long it had been since he'd shown this kind of care to another person. As he moved to get the soup, she caught his sleeve with fingers still cold, but strengthening. "Thank you," she said simply, "for finding me." He nodded gruffly and retreated to the kitchen, unsettled by the gratitude in her eyes. The routine of ladling soup into a bowl gave him a moment to compose himself. When he returned, she had managed to sit up straighter, the blankets pulled tight around her shoulders. "I was on my way to Timber Creek," she explained between careful sips. "New teaching position. The bus couldn't make it through the snow, so I thought I could walk the last few miles." She shook her head slightly. "Foolish, I know now." Jack wanted to agree, wanted to tell her exactly how foolish it had been, but something in her face stopped him. Instead, he found himself saying, "Storm's not letting up any time soon. You'll have to stay here till it passes." The words hung in the air between them, and Jack felt the weight of them settle on his shoulders. His carefully ordered world had just shifted on its axis, and he wasn't sure how to feel about that. But as he watched Sarah Winters sip her soup, in the firelight, her silver locket gleaming against the blankets, he realized some choices weren't choices at all. They were just fate, disguised as winter storms. Morning light filtered through frost-covered windows as Jack rummaged through his old medical kit, searching for the thermometer his army medic training had taught him to always keep handy. The worn leather case still bore his unit number, faded, but legible after all these years. Behind him, Sarah Winters slept on, her breathing finally steady and strong. His routine, carefully maintained for 2 decades, had already shifted to accommodate her presence. Coffee for 2 instead of 1, an extra log on the fire, small changes that felt seismic in their implications. When Sarah woke, the confusion in her eyes had been replaced by clarity. "You're looking better," he said, voice gruff from more talking in the past day than he'd done in months. "Need to check your temperature. Make sure you're really out of danger." She submitted to his examination with quiet dignity. "You were a medic?" she asked, noticing the kit's military markings. "Long time ago." He checked the thermometer. "Normal. That's good. Mr. Hawthorne." "Jack," he corrected, surprising himself. "Jack," she amended, pulling herself to sit straighter. "I can't thank you enough for saving my life. But I don't want to impose—" "Storm still got us blocked in," he interrupted, gesturing to the windows. Outside, the world remained a blur of white. "Roads won't be clear for days. No point discussing alternatives that don't exist." A small smile touched her lips, direct and to the point. "I appreciate that." She glanced down at her borrowed clothes. His old flannel shirt swimming on her frame. "Though I hope you'll let me earn my keep somehow. I'm not used to sitting idle." Something about her quiet determination reminded him of Claire, and he pushed the thought away quickly. "There's always work on a ranch," he said instead, "even in winter, but you need another day of rest first." "At least let me help with breakfast," she insisted, already trying to stand. Her legs, still weak from exposure, betrayed her, and Jack found himself catching her elbow to steady her. The contact was brief but electric, human touch after so long without it. "Breakfast can wait," he said firmly, helping her back to the couch. "Doctor's orders," she raised an eyebrow. "I thought you were a medic." Same difference out here. He busied himself adding another log to the fire, aware of her eyes on him. The silence between them should have been awkward, but somehow it wasn't. It was comfortable, like an old quilt wrapped around tired shoulders. "Tell me about Timber Creek," he found himself saying, though he'd meant to retreat to the kitchen. Must be something special to risk walking through a Wyoming winter for it. Sarah's face lit up, and suddenly the room felt warmer. "They're building a proper schoolhouse, the first one in the county that'll serve the outlying ranches, children who've never had a real chance at education." She paused, obviously reading the surprise on his face. What? Just been a while? Since I've seen anyone get excited about anything out here, he admitted. The world's full of things worth getting excited about, Mr. Hawthorne. Jack, she corrected herself, even in the middle of nowhere, especially in the middle of nowhere. He found himself wanting to believe her. This woman who'd nearly died in his front yard and now sat dispensing wisdom about enthusiasm. The world seemed different with her in it, as if her presence had shifted something fundamental about his carefully constructed isolation. A log popped in the fireplace, sending sparks dancing upward. Sarah watched them with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected storms." Jack looked at her sharply, but there was no hidden meaning in her face, just simple truth, offered without expectation. He didn't know how to respond to that, so he did what he'd done for 20 years when emotions threatened to overwhelm him. He fell back on routine. "I'll make us some breakfast," he said, standing. "Real food this time, not just soup. You need your strength back." But as he walked to the kitchen, he could feel the walls he'd built around his life developing their first real cracks in 20 years. And the strangest part was, he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to repair them. By late afternoon, Sarah had graduated from the couch to the kitchen, where she sat at the worn oak table, watching Jack attempt to cobble together dinner. The familiar weight of Claire's recipe book sat unopened on the counter. He hadn't touched it in years, but something made him bring it out today. "You know," Sarah said, wrapping her hands around a mug of tea, "I may not look it now, but I'm actually quite good in the kitchen." Her color had returned, bringing with it a quiet confidence that made Jack increasingly aware of how long he'd lived without real conversation. He glanced at her over his shoulder. "That's so." She nodded toward Claire's recipe book. Jack hesitated. That book was more than just recipes. It was 20 years of memories bound in faded leather. Claire's handwriting filled the margins with notes. "Add more butter. Jack loves this one. Perfect for cold nights." But something in Sarah's expression, respect maybe or understanding, made him nod. She handled the book carefully as if sensing its importance. "Oh," she breathed, finding a page marked, "with a dried flower." "Your wife's?" "Claire," he said, surprising himself by speaking her name aloud. "She collected recipes from everywhere. Said every good meal had a story behind it." Sarah's fingers traced Claire's handwriting gently. "She sounds wonderful. No platitudes about sorry for your loss, no awkward questions, just quiet acknowledgement. There's one in there," Jack found himself saying, "for a beef stew. Claire learned it from my mother, said it could cure anything from a cold to a broken heart." Sarah found the page, smiling at the detailed notes. "Shall we test that theory? I'm feeling much stronger, and you did say I should earn my keep." Before Jack could protest, she was already gathering ingredients, moving through his kitchen with surprising grace. He found himself drafted as her assistant, chopping vegetables, while she worked from Claire's precise instructions. "My mother taught me to cook too," Sarah said as she browned the meat. "Said a good meal was like a good book. It brings people together, makes them slow down and really talk to each other." The kitchen filled with familiar smells, awakening memories Jack had thought long buried. He watched Sarah add each ingredient with care, following Claire's marginal notes as if they were sacred text. "Your mother sounds wise," he said finally. Sarah touched her silver locket unconsciously. "She was. Both my parents were lost them 3 years ago, car accident." She stirred the pot slowly. "That's partly why I took the teaching position. Needed a fresh start, somewhere I could make a difference." Jack recognized the look in her eyes, the same one he'd seen in his mirror for 20 years. "Does it get easier?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "Not easier," she said thoughtfully, "just different." like a broken bone that heals stronger at the break. She tasted the stew, added a pinch of salt. "But you know that already, don't you?" He did. God help him, he did. They ate at the kitchen table, snow falling softly outside the windows. The stew tasted exactly as Jack remembered it. Rich, warm, healing. Sarah had followed Claire's recipe perfectly, right down to the extra carrots she'd always insisted made it better. "Tell me about the school you're heading to," Jack said, surprising himself again. When was the last time he'd asked anyone about their life? Sarah's face lit up as she described her plans. A library program, math competitions, science fairs. Her enthusiasm was infectious, making even the harsh Wyoming winter seem less forbidding. She talked with her hands, he noticed, gesturing with her spoon as she outlined her vision for bringing education to remote ranching families. "Those kids deserve every chance," she said firmly. "Distance shouldn't determine destiny." Jack found himself nodding. Claire used to say something similar, about how isolation was a choice, not a sentence. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning neither of them was ready to explore. Sarah busied herself with the dishes, and Jack let her, understanding the need for movement when emotions ran high. Later, as she headed back to the couch that had become her temporary bed, she paused. "Thank you, Jack. Not just for saving my life, but for sharing this." She gestured to the kitchen, the recipe book, the empty bowls that had held Claire's stew. "I know it couldn't have been easy." Jack watched her go, aware that something fundamental had shifted in his carefully ordered world. The recipe book sat on the counter, no longer just a repository of memories, but somehow a bridge between past and present, between grief and whatever this new feeling was that stirred in his chest. The next morning brought a brief respite in the storm, though the radio warned of more snow to come. Jack found Sarah in the study, wrapped in one of his old quilts, examining his bookshelves with undisguised interest. Her recovered belongings sat beside her, including a leather-bound journal with dog-eared pages and colourful tabs sticking out at odd angles. "You have a first edition Steinbeck," she said without turning around. "East of Eden. I wouldn't have expected that out here." "Claire's influence," he said, then added, "I read. Plenty of time for it during winter storms." She turned then, a warm smile touching her lips. "A rancher who reads Steinbeck. You're full of surprises, Jack Hawthorne." He shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "Weather report says we're in for another 3 days at least. Might as well make yourself at home." He nodded toward her journal. "That your lesson plans?" Sarah picked up the journal, running her fingers over its worn cover. "My teaching journal. Started it my first year in the classroom." She hesitated, then held it out to him. "Would you like to see?" Jack took it carefully, aware of the trust, implicit in the gesture. Inside, neat handwriting filled the pages, interspersed with drawings, newspaper clippings, and photographs. It wasn't just lesson plans. It was a record of a life dedicated to changing other lives. "This boy," Sarah said, pointing to a photo of a grinning teenager holding a science fair trophy. "Everyone said he'd never amount to anything. Learning disability, troubled home life. But he just needed someone to believe in him. He's in college, now studying engineering." Jack turned the pages slowly. Each entry told a story of transformation. Struggling students finding their way, shy kids discovering their voices, broken families healing through education. Sarah's notes were filled with hope and determination, even when facing setbacks. "You really believe in this, don't you?" he asked, pausing at a page where she'd outlined plans for the new Timber Creek school. "That education can change everything." "I believe everyone deserves a chance to surprise themselves," she said quietly. "Sometimes all it takes is one person, willing to see past the walls people build around themselves." Her words hit too close to home, and Jack busied himself with the journal's pages. A newspaper clipping caught his eye. Sarah accepting a teaching award in Denver. The article praised her innovative approaches to reaching challenging students. "Is that why you chose Timber Creek?" he asked. "The challenge?" She was quiet for a moment, considering. "Partly, but also—" She touched her locket absently. "After. My parents died, I needed purpose. These remote communities, these children who've never had a real chance at education, they gave me that purpose." Jack nodded, understanding more than he wanted to admit. Claire was like that, always looking for ways to make things better. She started a library program in town, drove books out to the remote ranches herself. Sarah's eyes lit up. "Really? That's exactly what I've been planning for Timber Creek. See, here." She flipped through her journal to a detailed outline. "A mobile library program, reaching families who can't make it into town regularly." Before Jack knew it, they were sitting together on the study's old leather couch, heads bent over Sarah's journal, discussing the logistics of rural education. She had thought of everything: weather contingencies, seasonal ranch schedules, even ways to incorporate local history and agriculture into her lessons. "You could help," she said suddenly, then seemed surprised by her own boldness. "I mean, with the local history portions. Your family's been here for generations, and you clearly understand both the ranching life and the importance of education." Jack looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just the school teacher, but the woman, passionate, intelligent, unafraid to challenge the status quo. For a moment he allowed himself to imagine it, sharing the history of this land, these mountains, with a new generation. "I'm not much for public speaking," he said finally. Sarah smiled. Neither was that boy with the science fair trophy at first. She closed her journal gently. "Sometimes the best teachers are the ones who never planned to teach at all." The wind picked up outside, reminding them that they were still trapped together in this unexpected pause in their separate lives. But somehow the study felt warmer, more alive than it had in years. Jack's books, long untouched, seemed to whisper with possibility from their shelves. "Maybe," he said, surprising himself, "when the storm clears, maybe." Sarah's smile widened, and Jack felt another brick fall from the wall he'd built around his heart. Her teaching journal lay between them on the couch, a bridge between his isolated past and what might be a less lonely future. The afternoon light was fading when Sarah discovered the old photograph album tucked away on a bottom shelf in the study. Its leather binding was cracked with age, the pages yellow at the edges. She hadn't meant to pry, but as she dusted the shelves, her way of keeping busy, it had fallen open, spilling memories across the hardwood floor. Jack found her there, kneeling among scattered photographs, holding one with trembling hands. It showed a younger version of himself and Claire, on their wedding day, standing in front of the ranch house. The mountains rose behind them, eternal witnesses to their joy. "I'm sorry," Sarah said quickly, trying to gather the photos. "I was cleaning and it fell. It's all right." Jack's voice was rough as he knelt beside her. "They deserve to be looked at. Been too long since anyone has." The photograph in Sarah's hands captured Claire mid-laugh, her white dress catching the wind. "She was beautiful," Sarah said softly, "inside and out." Jack picked up another photo, Claire in the garden she'd planted, dirt on her cheeks, grinning at the camera. That was her gift, seeing beauty everywhere, even in this harsh place. Sarah settled back against the bookshelf, the album in her lap. "Tell me about her?" The request was gentle, without pressure. Jack was silent for so long that Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. But then he reached for a photograph of Claire standing by the barn, holding up a fresh-caught fish. She was a city girl, Denver. Everyone said she'd never last out here, but she loved it from day one, said the mountains spoke to her soul. He traced the edge of the photo. Learned to fish, to ride, to garden in this unforgiving soil. Never complained, not once. "What happened?" Sarah asked softly, though she suspected she knew. "Cancer." The word fell between them like a stone. Found out in spring. Lost her by winter. 20 years ago now. He picked up another photo. Claire in a hospital bed, still smiling, though her face was gaunt. She made me promise not to let it break me, not to shut myself away. A bitter laugh escaped him. Failed her there. Sarah touched his arm gently. Grief doesn't follow promises, Jack. We all cope in our own ways. She opened her locket, showing him the photo inside. My parents. It was sudden. A patch of black ice. A truck driver who'd been on the road too long. I spent 2 years trying to outrun the pain, moving from school to school. Does that work? Jack asked, though they both knew the answer, about as well as hiding from it. She closed the locket. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe we just need to learn to carry it differently. Jack reached for another photograph. This one showing Claire teaching him to bake bread in their kitchen. She used to say that too, that grief was like bread dough. You had to work with it, let it rise in its own time. She sounds very wise. She would have liked you, Jack said suddenly, then looked surprised at his own words. Sarah smiled softly. I wish I could have met her. She turned a page in the album, revealing more snapshots of life on the ranch. Cattle drives, summer picnics, quiet moments on the porch. You had a beautiful life together. We did. Jack's voice was thick with memory. Sometimes I think that's why I stayed out here alone so long. Felt like leaving would mean leaving her. But she's not just in this place, is she? Sarah gestured to the scattered photos. She's in everything she taught you, every life she touched. Like these photographs, pieces of light caught and held. Jack was quiet for a long moment, looking at the images of his past life spread around them. Finally, he picked up the wedding photo again. You know what her last words to me were? Don't forget to live, Jack Hawthorne. Promise me you'll remember how. Sarah watched him study the photograph, saw the weight of 20 years of solitude in his shoulders. Maybe it's not too late to keep that promise, she said softly. Outside, the wind had died down, leaving an unusual stillness. In the quiet, Jack began to gather the photographs, handling each one with care. But instead of returning the album to its shelf, he placed it on the coffee table. Maybe you're right, he said, and something in his voice had changed. Maybe it's time these saw the light again. Sarah helped him arrange the photos back in their pages, each one a piece of the story that had shaped him. As they worked, the setting sun painted the study in shades of gold, and the mountains outside stood silent, watching another moment of change unfold within their ancient shadows. 3 days into their unexpected coexistence, Jack found Sarah at his desk, poring over the ranch ledger. Her fingers traced the columns of neat figures, feed costs, cattle counts, repair expenses, while morning light spilled through the frost-edged windows. The leather-bound book lay open to last month's entries, his own cramped handwriting telling the story of the ranch in numbers and notes. Hope you don't mind, she said, looking up. I was curious about how a working ranch operates. The numbers tell quite a story. Jack set down their coffee mugs. He'd started making hers with a touch of honey, just as she liked it. What story's that? That you're running this place lean but smart. She tapped a column of feed calculations. You've worked out exactly how much to keep the operation sustainable without overextending. But there's room for growth here, if you wanted it. Her business acumen surprised him. Taught economics before teaching here? Sarah smiled. My father was an accountant. He taught me to read stories in ledgers the way my mother taught me to read them in books. She sipped her coffee. Have you considered diversifying? The tourist industry is growing in Wyoming. People pay good money for an authentic ranch experience. Hadn't thought about it, Jack said, though that wasn't entirely true. The idea had crossed his mind over the years, but change had seemed too daunting. Been focused on keeping things running as they are. Sometimes maintaining the status quo takes more energy than growing. She turned to a blank page in the ledger. "May I?" He nodded, curious. Sarah began sketching out projections, potential, income from guided trail rides, weekend stays, cattle drive experiences. Her numbers were conservative but promising. "You've given this some thought," he observed. "Teacher's habit. Always looking for practical applications." She glanced up at him. "Besides, I couldn't sleep last night. The wind makes this place sing." Jack knew that sound, the way the old house harmonized with mountain winds. Claire used to say the same thing. Smart woman. Sarah returned to the ledger. "You know, these kinds of programs could tie in perfectly with the school's curriculum. Hands-on learning about ranching history, ecology, business mathematics." The idea stirred something in him, a long-dormant sense of possibility. A lot of work starting something like that. True. She didn't push, just kept writing. "But you wouldn't have to do it alone." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Jack busied himself studying the ledger's neat columns, but his mind was already calculating, planning. The barn's upper level could be converted into guest quarters. The old bunkhouse could be restored. The south pasture trail would be perfect for rides. "Mind if I help with the morning chores?" Sarah asked, closing the ledger. "I'm feeling much stronger, and sitting around isn't my style." Jack hesitated. "It's cold out there, I noticed," she said dryly. "I also noticed you're behind on fence maintenance in the south pasture. The numbers in your ledger don't lie, Jack Hawthorne." He couldn't help but smile. "Caught that, did you?" "That, and the fact that you're working twice as hard as you need to, doing everything alone." She stood, stretching. "I may not know much about ranching, but I'm a quick learner, and I've got a vested interest in staying warm through activity." 20 minutes later, they stood in the barn while Jack showed her how to check the horse's hooves for ice build-up. Sarah listened with the same focused attention she'd given the ledger, asking smart questions and taking mental notes. Buck, usually standoffish with strangers, nuzzled her pocket hopefully. "No treats yet, big fellow," she laughed. "Got to earn your trust first." "He already trusts you," Jack said, surprised by the horse's behavior. "Usually takes him weeks to warm up to people. Animals know more than we give them credit for." She patted Buck's neck, like knowing when someone needs them or when someone needs to be needed. Their eyes met over the horse's back, and Jack felt that now familiar shift in his chest, like frozen ground beginning to thaw. Sarah held his gaze for a moment before turning back to her task, humming softly as she worked. Together they fell into a rhythm, feeding, cleaning, checking equipment. The morning passed in comfortable silence, punctuated by occasional questions or observations. By the time they headed back to the house, the sun had burned through the clouds, making the snow-covered landscape glitter. The ranch ledger sat on the desk where they'd left it, its pages now holding not just numbers, but possibilities. Jack found himself wondering what other stories it might tell in the months to come, what new chapters might be written in those blank pages. Evening settled over the ranch like a soft blanket, bringing with it another heavy snowfall. After dinner, while Sarah washed dishes despite Jack's protests, he found himself drawn to the old chess set gathering dust on a shelf. His fingers traced the hand-carved pieces, his grandfather's work, each one unique, bearing the marks of careful craftsmanship and years of use. "You play?" Sarah asked, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Used to. With my father." Jack lifted the black king, its crown worn smooth by decades of handling. He carved this set during his first winter here. Said a man needed something to occupy his mind when the snow kept him inside. Well then, Sarah cleared space on the kitchen table. "Seems appropriate, doesn't it?" Jack hesitated. "Been a while?" "Perfect." She smiled, setting up the pieces. "Then we'll be evenly matched. I haven't played since college." The familiar weight of the wooden pieces in his hands awakened muscle memory. His father's voice echoed in his mind. Chess is like ranching, son. You've got to think 3 moves ahead and still be ready for surprise. Sarah took white, moving a pawn with deliberate care. My father tried to teach me strategy, she said, watching Jack consider his move. I was always too impatient, wanting to charge ahead with my knights. Sounds like Claire. Jack moved his own pawn. She'd send her queen right into battle. Consequences. Be damned. Did she win? Sometimes. Her unpredictability drove my father crazy. The memory brought an unexpected smile to his face. He was a methodical player, liked everything organized, planned out. Like someone else I'm getting to know? Sarah's eyes twinkled as she advanced another piece. Their game progressed slowly, both of them rusty, but enjoying the mental exercise. Sarah proved to be more strategic than she'd claimed, setting up subtle traps that Jack barely avoided. The comfortable silence between moves was punctuated by the crackling fire and the soft click of wooden pieces on the board. "Check!" Sarah announced, her bishop threatening his king. Jack studied the board, seeing his father's hands in every carved piece, remembering winter evenings much like this one, but where those memories had once brought only pain. Tonight they carried a different weight, something closer to appreciation, to honor. "You're better than you let on," he said, moving his king to safety. "I'm full of surprises." She leaned forward, considering her next move. "Like how I know you're letting me win," Jack blinked. "I'm not. You had a chance to take my queen 3 moves ago." Her knowing smile caught him off guard. "I may be rusty, but I'm not blind." "Caught," Jack chuckled, a sound that surprised them both. "Guilty. Though in my defense it was a beautiful setup you had there. Seemed ashamed to dismantle it." Jack. "Hawthorne," Sarah said, sitting back with mock severity, "I never took you for a gentleman. Don't let it get around. I have a reputation to maintain." Their shared laughter filled the kitchen, warm and unexpected as spring flowers pushing through snow. Sarah's eyes crinkled at the corners when she laughed, Jack noticed, and something in his chest tightened at the observation. "Your move," she said softly, and somehow it felt like she meant more than just the game. Jack studied the board, seeing now how she'd been quietly maneuvering her pieces all along, building toward something he hadn't noticed, just like she'd been doing with him, he realized. Gentle moves, patient strategy, waiting for him to lower his defenses. "You know," he said, moving his knight, "my father carved an extra set of pieces. Never finished them. They're probably still in the workshop somewhere." Sarah captured his knight with a delicate touch. "Are you suggesting we could restore them?" "Might be worth a try, if you're interested in learning." "I'd like that." She looked up at him. "Though I hope you're a more patient teacher than my father was. Well, I've got plenty of practice with stubborn creatures." He nodded toward the window where they could see the barn. "Horses, cattle. Are you comparing me to your livestock, Mr. Hawthorne?" "Never." He moved his bishop. "They're much better chess players." Her laughter rang out again, clear as a bell, and Jack found himself laughing with her. The carved chess pieces stood witness to this moment of unexpected joy, these simple wooden figures that had seen 3 generations of Hawthorns through winter nights. "Checkmate," Sarah announced suddenly. Jack stared at the board, seeing how she'd led him right into it. "Well played, Miss Winters." "Thank you." She began gathering the pieces with careful hands. "For letting me win fair and square this time. I didn't." He stopped, seeing her smile. "Another game? I thought you'd never ask." The old radio on the kitchen counter crackled with static, its weather band signal fighting against the interference of the mountains. Jack fiddled with the dial, trying to clear the reception. Sarah watched from the doorway, her expression growing more concerned as fragments of the forecast cut through the noise. Severe winter storm warning. Accumulations of up to 3 feet. Dangerous whiteout conditions. The radio's vacuum tubes hummed with effort, the ancient device a testament to simpler times when isolation meant true disconnection. Jack had never bothered to replace it with anything more modern. What was the point when all he needed to know was whether to expect snow or more snow? "Doesn't sound good," Sarah said quietly. Jack switched off the radio, its final static-filled warning hanging in the air between them. "No, it doesn't." He turned to face her. "You're supposed to start at Timber Creek next week." "I know." She wrapped her arms around herself, and Jack realized she was wearing one of Claire's old sweaters. He'd found a box of winter clothes in the attic for her. The sight stirred something in his chest, a mixture of past and present that left him unsettled. Even after this storm passes, the roads won't be cleared for days. The county focuses on the main highways first. These back roads... He trailed off, seeing the worry in her eyes. "I should try to call the school board," she said. "Let them know I'm delayed." She glanced at the phone on the wall. Another relic of simpler times. Does it still work? Lines probably down already, storms moving in fast. He moved to the window, watching dark clouds gather over the mountains. The weather had that peculiar heaviness that preceded major storms, the air thick with anticipation. Sarah joined him at the window, their reflections ghostly in the glass. "I'm sorry, Jack. I never meant to impose this long. You're not—" He started, then stopped, surprised by the force of his own reaction. "You're not an imposition." She turned to look at him, really look at him, and Jack found himself unable to meet her eyes. "What am I, then?" The question hung between them, heavy as the storm clouds. Before he could answer, a gust of wind rattled the windows, making them both jump. The moment broke, and Jack retreated to safer ground. "Need to check the generator," he said gruffly. "Make sure we're ready if the power goes." "I'll help," Sarah offered, already reaching for her borrowed coat. They worked together in the gathering gloom, checking fuel levels, testing the backup system, securing anything that might blow away in the wind. The routine was familiar to Jack, but Sarah's presence made him hyper-aware of every movement, every casual brush of hands as they passed tools back and forth. "Jack," she said suddenly, pausing in her work, "what happens after?" He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "After the storm, after I leave for Timber Creek," she set down the fuel can she'd been holding. "We can't pretend this week hasn't changed things." Jack busied himself with the generator's wiring, though it didn't need checking. "You have your life to get back to, your plans, your students waiting." "That's not an answer. Only one I've got." He straightened up, finally meeting her eyes. "Been alone a long time, Sarah, set in my ways." "And that's how you want to stay?" There was no accusation in her voice, only genuine question. Before he could respond, the wind picked up dramatically, bringing with it the first heavy flakes of snow. They hurried to finish their preparations, the conversation suspended but not forgotten. As they headed back to the house, Sarah stopped on the porch, watching the storm roll in. "You know what I think?" she said, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "I think sometimes life sends us storms when we need them most, when we're too stubborn or scared to make changes on our own." Jack stood beside her, feeling the bite of approaching winter. "Sounds like something Claire would say." She must have been quite a woman. She was. Jack watched the snow begin to fall in earnest. "You remind me of her sometimes, not in looks or mannerisms, but in the way you see through things, through me." Sarah turned to him, snowflakes catching in her hair. "Is that why you're afraid?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Before he could answer, a massive gust of wind slammed into the house, making the old timber creak. The storm was upon them. "Better get inside," Jack said, holding the door open for her. But as Sarah passed him, the scent of Claire's sweater mingling with Sarah's own presence, he realized that some storms couldn't be avoided by seeking shelter. Some storms had to be faced head-on, no matter how frightening the prospect of change might be. The old barn door groaned against the wind as Jack forced it open at dawn. The storm had intensified overnight, turning the world into a canvas of white fury. He'd woken to find Sarah already up, dressed in Claire's old winter gear, insisting on helping with the morning chores despite his protests. "The cattle need checking," she said, practically shouting over the wind. "You said yourself this is a two-person job in weather like this." "It's too dangerous." Jack secured a rope between the house and barn, an old rancher's trick for navigating whiteouts. Temperatures dropped below zero, wind chills worse. "I'm not made of glass, Jack." There was steel in her voice that reminded him of Claire during their worst arguments. "And you can't do this alone. Been managing just fine for 20 years. Managing isn't living." She grabbed the other end of the rope, her eyes challenging him through the swirling snow. "And I'm coming with you, whether you like it or not." The set of her jaw told him further argument was pointless. They worked their way to the barn, the wind trying its best to knock them off their feet. Inside, the horses were restless, sensing the storm's fury. Sarah moved to calm them while Jack gathered supplies for the cattle check. "We'll take Buck and Duke," he said finally, resigned to her participation. "Stay close. Visibility's near zero out there." Sarah nodded, already helping to tack up the horses. Her movements were sure despite her city background, proving she'd been paying attention during their previous days working together. Under different circumstances, Jack might have felt proud. They rode out into the storm, the horses pushing through snowdrifts that reached their chests. The cattle would have sought shelter in the grove of trees at the southern end of the property. If they were lucky, the entire herd would be there. The wind howled around them, carrying ice crystals that stung any exposed skin. Jack kept checking over his shoulder, making sure Sarah was still behind him. She rode well, perfectly balanced despite the challenging conditions. But every time a particularly strong gust hit them, his heart clenched with worry. They found the herd exactly where Jack had predicted, huddled together for warmth. As they did a head count, Sarah suddenly pointed to a spot beyond the trees. "Jack, there's one separated from the group." He squinted through the snow, making out the dark shape of a young heifer struggling against the wind. Before he could stop her, Sarah was already turning Duke toward the stray animal. "Sarah, wait!" But his voice was lost in the storm. She guided Duke carefully through the deep snow, approaching the heifer from an angle as Jack had taught her. Everything seemed under control until a violent gust of wind spooked both horse and heifer. Duke reared, nearly unseating Sarah, while the frightened heifer bolted directly into a snowdrift. Jack's heart stopped as he watched Sarah fight to control the horse. She managed to stay mounted, but the heifer was now truly stuck, bellowing in panic. "We need to help her," Sarah called out, having regained control of Duke. "Get back to the barn," Jack shouted. "I'll handle this. She'll die if we don't get her out now." Sarah was already dismounting, pulling rope from her saddlebag. "I'm not leaving!" The argument that followed was like nothing Jack had experienced since Claire's final days. Sarah matched him stubborn word for stubborn word, all while efficiently setting up a rescue line for the heifer. "You can't control everything, Jack. You can't protect everyone from every danger, and you can't just throw yourself into every situation without thinking of the consequences. Is that what you think I'm doing?" She secured her end of the rope around Duke's saddle horn. "Or is that what you've been doing for 20 years, hiding from consequences, from connections, from life itself?" The words hit him like physical blows, but there was no time to dwell on them. The heifer's struggles were weakening, and the storm was getting worse. They had to work together or risk losing both the animal and themselves. For the next 30 minutes they moved in grim synchronization. Jack's experience and Sarah's determination proved a powerful combination. When they finally pulled the exhausted heifer free and guided her back to the herd, they were both covered in snow and breathing hard. The ride back to the barn was silent, the argument suspended but not resolved. Only when they were safely inside, Brushing snow from the horses' coats, did Sarah speak again. "I know you think I'm reckless," she said quietly, "but sometimes the biggest risk is never taking any at all." Jack continued brushing Buck, unable to look at her. "Could have lost you out there, but you didn't." Her voice softened. "You can't lose something you won't let yourself have, Jack." He turned then, finally meeting her eyes. The barn door rattled against its frame, a constant reminder of the storm raging outside and the one building between them. Everything he'd carefully constructed over 20 years, his isolation, his routine, his emotional walls, was being challenged by this woman who refused to be protected from life's risks. "I can't," he started, but Sarah cut him off. "Can't, or won't," she hung up Duke's tack with precise movements, "because there's a world of difference between the two." Evening found them in the kitchen, the space between them filled with unspoken words. A cracked coffee mug sat between them on the table, one of Claire's old favorites that Sarah had accidentally dropped after their return from the barn. Though she'd apologized profusely, Jack had barely acknowledged it, lost in his own thoughts. The crack in the ceramic seemed to mirror the fissure growing between them. Sarah wrapped her hands around her own mug, watching steam rise in the tense silence. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the mountains, as if nature itself was determined to force a resolution. "I've called Timber Creek," Sarah finally said. Jack looked up sharply. They both knew the phones were down. "Before the storm," she clarified, "asked about delaying my start date." "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm not ready to leave." The words hung in the air between them. "Not like this." Jack stood abruptly, taking his coffee to the sink. The cracked mug sat accusingly on the table, its imperfection impossible to ignore. "You have obligations, a contract." "I have feelings too." Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. "And I think you do as well, even if you're determined to ignore them." "What I feel doesn't matter." He gripped the edge of the sink, knuckles white. "You don't belong here, don't I?" She stood now too, challenge in her voice. "These past days, working beside you, sharing meals, talking about the future, none of that matters." "It can't matter." The words came out harsher than he intended. "This isn't some romance novel, Sarah. Life doesn't work that way." "No, it doesn't." She moved closer, forcing him to turn and face her. "Life is messy and unpredictable, and sometimes it drops opportunities in our laps disguised as disasters, like a snowstorm, like a stranger needing rescue." Jack could smell Claire's perfume on the sweater Sarah wore, could see the same fierce determination in her eyes that Claire had shown when fighting for something she believed in. "It was too much. I'm taking you to Timber Creek as soon as the road's clear." His voice was flat, final. "This ends here." Sarah recoiled as if he'd struck her. For a moment he thought she might cry. Instead, she straightened her spine and met his gaze directly. "That's what you want? To go back to your solitary existence? To die by degrees in this beautiful prison you've built?" "What I want," his voice caught, "what I want doesn't change reality. You have a life waiting, students counting on you, dreams bigger than this ranch, bigger than you." She shook her head sadly. "You don't get to decide what my dreams should be, Jack Hawthorne, and you don't get to use my career as an excuse for your fear." She turned away, moving toward the stairs, then stopped. Without looking back, she said, "Claire wouldn't want this for you, this half-life you're clinging to. She'd want—" "Don't!" The word came out as a growl. "Don't tell me what Claire would want. Someone has to." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "Because you've stopped listening to her memory and started hiding behind it instead." The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. He watched helplessly as she climbed the stairs, her footsteps fading into the storm's howl. The cracked mug sat on the table between where they had been, its broken surface catching the lamplight. Jack sank into a kitchen chair, suddenly exhausted. He picked up the mug, running his thumb along its crack. Claire had bought it on their honeymoon, a silly souvenir from some roadside store. Everything breaks eventually, she'd said when he teased her about its garish design. Might as well love it while it's whole. Now, looking at the crack, he realized it could be repaired. Not perfectly. It would always show the line where it had broken, but maybe that was the point. Maybe the repair itself could become part of its story, part of its beauty. The revelation struck him with such force that he almost missed the sound of movement upstairs. When he heard the distinctive creak of the guest room closet door, followed by the soft thud of a bag being packed, his blood ran cold. She was leaving, not waiting for the roads to clear, not waiting for his permission or protection. Sarah Winters was choosing to face the storm, rather than stay another night under the same roof as his cowardice. The cracked mug in his hands suddenly felt like the most important object in the world. A physical manifestation of his choice. He could leave it broken, a reminder of what he'd lost, or he could try to repair it, accepting that it would never be the same but might be beautiful in a different way. Thunder cracked overhead, and Jack made his decision. Jack took the stairs 2 at a time, the cracked mug still in his hand, only to find Sarah already at the front door, pulling on her borrowed boots. An unsealed envelope lay on the entry table, a letter he'd never meant for anyone to read, discovered in his desk drawer during her cleaning. His heart stopped when he recognized Claire's handwriting on the outside. For Jack, when you're ready to live again. Sarah, wait! His voice was rough with emotion. She paused, one hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn around. I found it yesterday, she said quietly. Claire wrote it in her final days, didn't she? But you never opened it. No. The admission cost him. Never found the courage. 20 years, Jack. Now she did turn, and the pain in her eyes matched his own. 20 years of holding on to grief so tight you couldn't make room for anything else. Was it worth it? He looked down at the cracked mug in his hands, then at the envelope that held his wife's final words. I thought... He struggled to find the words. I thought being alone was honoring her memory. Thought if I loved again, it would mean loving her less. Oh, Jack. Sarah's voice softened. Is that what you really believe Claire would have wanted for you? No. The truth, finally spoken, seemed to lift a weight from his shoulders. No, she'd have kicked my stubborn behind from here to Timber Creek for wasting so many years. A ghost of a smile touched Sarah's lips. She sounds more sensible than you. She was. Jack set the mug down and picked up the envelope with trembling fingers. Maybe it's time I listened to her. Sarah watched as he broke the seal, carefully unfolding the letter within. His eyes moved over the familiar handwriting, and she saw the exact moment the walls around his heart began to crumble. My dearest, stubborn Jack, he read aloud, voice catching. If you're reading this, you finally found someone worth opening this letter for, someone who makes you question all the walls you've built. Someone who reminds you that love isn't a finite resource. It grows with use, like a muscle strengthening with exercise. He had to stop, overwhelmed. Sarah moved closer, close enough to touch, but maintaining the distance his emotions needed. I know you, my love, he continued after a moment. Know you'll try to honor my memory by locking your heart away, but that would dishonor everything we shared. We loved deeply, fully, without reservation. That kind of love shouldn't end with me. It should teach you how to love again. The storm outside seemed to pause, as if nature itself was holding its breath. So when you find her, Jack, the one who makes you question your carefully constructed solitude, don't you dare push her away in my name. Love isn't betrayal, it's growth, it's hope, it's the courage to begin again. Sarah's eyes shone with tears. "She knew you so well." "She did." Jack looked up from the letter, really seeing Sarah for the first time since she'd entered his life. "Just like you do." "Jack, I'm scared," he admitted, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "Scared of changing, of feeling, of losing again. But I'm more scared of letting you walk out that door without telling you the truth." "What truth?" "That you've brought spring back to a place that's been winter for 20 years. That watching. You with the horses, seeing your passion for teaching, hearing your laugh over chess games. It's woken something in me I thought was dead." He took a shaky breath. "That the thought of you leaving feels like losing everything all over again." Sarah stepped closer, close enough now that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "Then ask me to stay. It wouldn't be fair. Your career, your dreams are mine to choose." She touched his cheek gently. "Timber Creek is 30 miles away. People commute further than that every day. And this ranch of yours? It has potential for educational programs, remember? We could build something here together if you're willing to try." Jack looked down at Claire's letter, at the final lines he hadn't read aloud. "Love is always worth the risk, my darling. Always." "Sarah Winters," he said softly, "would you consider staying? Not just until the storm passes, but after." Her answer was to close the final distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that tasted of coffee, tears, and possibility. When they finally parted, the storm outside had gentled, as if it too understood that its work was done. The cracked mug sat on the table, waiting to be repaired. Claire's letter lay open beside it, its long-held wisdom finally set free. And in the space between past and future, two people who had thought themselves finished with love discovered that some stories don't end with loss. They begin there. Dawn painted the snow-covered mountains in shades of rose and gold, the storm having spent itself sometime in the night. Jack stood at the kitchen window, watching Sarah in the greenhouse attached to the south side of the house. She'd discovered it during their morning chores, Claire's old garden sanctuary, long neglected but still standing. Through the frost-touched glass, he could see her examining the empty planters, her breath visible in the cold air. She'd found the box of stored seedlings he'd forgotten about, carefully preserved seeds that Claire had collected for the next spring's planting, a spring she never saw. He poured 2 cups of coffee and made his way to the greenhouse. The door creaked with disuse, but the hinges held. Sarah looked up, snowmelt dripping from her hair where she'd brushed against the glass ceiling. "Sorry," she said, though her eyes were bright with excitement. "I couldn't resist exploring. These seeds, they're still viable. With proper care, proper timing." Jack handed her a coffee cup. "Claire used to start her plantings in February. Said you had to believe in spring, even in the heart of winter. Smart woman." Sarah sipped her coffee, then gestured to the wooden shelves. "These are well built. Your work?" "Made them our first winter here." Claire drew up the plans. He ran, a hand along the worn wood. She had the whole thing mapped out, vegetables on the lower shelves, flowers up top to catch the best light. "We could do that again." Sarah spoke carefully, testing the waters of their new understanding. "These heritage seeds, they're part of the ranch's story, part of Claire's legacy." Jack felt something shift in his chest, like ice breaking up. "On a spring river. You want to restore it, if you're willing." She set down her coffee and pulled out a small notebook, her ever-present teaching journal. "Actually, I've been thinking. Schools are always looking for hands-on science projects. Growing from heritage seeds, learning about agricultural history, sustainable farming practices, teaching opportunities," Jack said, understanding dawning. "Exactly." Her enthusiasm was infectious. "We could start small, just a few plantings, to see what takes, But imagine the possibilities, Jack. Students learning not just from books, but from the land itself. Your land, Claire's garden. He watched her sketch preliminary plans in her notebook, her handwriting quick and sure. The morning light caught the silver threads in her dark hair, and suddenly he could see it all. The greenhouse coming back to life, young voices learning the patience of growing things, Sarah teaching about cycles of nature and history. "We'd need to replace some of the glass panels," he said, already mentally cataloguing the work needed. "Upgrade the heating system." Sarah looked up, hope blooming in her eyes. "Is that a yes?" Instead of answering directly, Jack reached into the pocket of his workshirt and pulled out a small envelope. "Found these this morning, going through Claire's old papers. Thought you might want them." Sarah opened the envelope carefully. Inside were detailed drawings of the greenhouse layout, planting schedules, and notes about which flowers thrived best in the mountain climate. Claire's handwriting filled the margins with observations and advice. "She was so thorough," Sarah said softly, touching the pages with gentle fingers. "She believed in passing on knowledge." Jack moved closer, looking at the familiar drawings over her shoulder. "Said every garden was a lesson in faith. Faith in seasons changing, in seeds, sprouting in life continuing. And do you believe that, Jack?" He turned her gently to face him. "I'm starting to believe in a lot of things I'd forgotten about." Sarah stretched up on her tiptoes and kissed him softly. When she pulled back, her eyes were serious. "We don't have to erase the past to build a future, you know. Claire will always be part of this place, part of you." "I know." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "But maybe that's as it should be. Her wisdom helping us grow something new." Sarah smiled and turned back to the seedling boxes. Things first, we'll need to sort these by planting time, check their viability, then plan the bed rotations." She was already making lists in her notebook, teacher mode fully engaged. Jack watched her work, feeling the weight of 20 winters, lifting from his shoulders. Through the greenhouse glass, he could see the morning sun touching the mountains, turning last night's threatening snow into today's promise of renewal. Somewhere, he was sure, Claire was smiling at the sight of her sanctuary coming back to life. The seeds in their packets waited patiently for spring, just as they had for all these years. But now, finally, they would have their chance to grow. The spare room had stood untouched for 2 decades, serving as a repository for memories too painful to sort through, but too precious to discard. Now, as Jack helped Sarah clear space among the boxes and covered furniture, each item they moved felt like turning a page in a long-closed book. "What's in this one?" Sarah asked, indicating a cedar chest near the window. "Claire's hope chest." Jack ran a hand along its smooth surface. "Her mother gave it to her when we married. Always meant to—" He trailed off, remembering all the things they'd meant to do. Sarah touched his arm gently. "We can leave it for now." But Jack shook his head, drawing out the key he'd carried on his key ring all these years. "No, it's time." Together they opened the chest. The scent of cedar and lavender emerged, along with carefully preserved linens, quilts, and photographs. Sarah handled each item with reverence, helping Jack sort what to keep displayed and what to store properly. She had excellent taste, Sarah said, holding up a hand-stitched quilt in shades of blue and green. "These colors remind me of the mountains in spring." That was her favorite season. Jack smiled at the memory. Said winter was for planning, but spring was for living. They worked through the afternoon, transforming the room from a storage space back into living quarters. Sarah's few belongings, rescued from her snow-covered car once the weather cleared, looked almost shy among the room's renewed personality. "The school board was surprisingly understanding," she said, arranging her books on a freshly dusted shelf. "Apparently they've had trouble keeping teachers in Timber Creek because of the commute. The fact that I'm willing to make the drive daily is a point in my favor." Jack paused in his work. "You're sure about this?" 30 miles of mountain roads. Every day. I've thought it through. She turned to face him. The morning drive will let me plan my lessons. The evening drive will let me decompress. And coming home to you. She smiled. Worth every mile. The word home hung in the air between them, weighted with promise. Jack moved to the window, clearing decades of dust from the panes. Outside, he could see the ranch spreading below them, the barn, the greenhouse, the distant pastures, all of it changing, coming back to life under Sarah's influence. Had an interesting call from Martha at the general store, he said, attempting casualness. News travels fast in small towns. Sarah's hands stilled on her books. And, she mentioned, that the widow Cassidy's been running a small boarding house in town for teachers and nurses, suggested you might be more comfortable there. He turned to gauge her reaction, told her you'd already found more suitable arrangements. A smile tugged at Sarah's lips. Did you now? Also might have mentioned we'd be by on Saturday to pick up some greenhouse supplies. He rubbed the back of his neck. And maybe stay for lunch at the diner. Sarah's eyes widened. Jack Hawthorne voluntarily appearing in public was a significant development. Are you sure you're ready for that? The questions, the gossip? Figure it's time I rejoined the land of the living. He moved to help her with a particularly heavy box. Besides, if you're going to be teaching their children, folks should know who you are, who we are. And who are we, Jack? The question was gentle, but it carried weight. Jack set down the box and took her hands in his. We're two people who've been given a second chance. At love, at life, at making something meaningful. He gestured to the room around them. This isn't just about clearing space for your things. It's about making space in my life, in my heart. Sarah squeezed his hands. You know, in all my teaching years, the best lessons always involve transformation. Taking something old, something forgotten, and helping it find new purpose, like a ranch that's been sleeping for 20 years, like a man who's been doing the same. She reached up to touch his cheek. Thank you for trusting me with both. The afternoon light slanted through. The newly cleaned windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny stars. The room, so long a shrine to the past, was gradually taking on a new identity, not erasing what came before, but building upon it, like layers of sediment forming new earth. On the bedside table, they placed a photograph of Claire in her garden, her smile bright and knowing. Beside it, Sarah set a small vase, ready for the first blooms from the greenhouse. Past and future, side by side, each made richer by the other's presence. March arrived with the first hints of thaw, bringing with it changes both subtle and profound. Jack stood at the forge in his workshop, carefully heating a band of gold, his grandmother's wedding ring, worn smooth by 3 generations of love. Sarah was in town, teaching her first full week of classes at Timber Creek, and the quiet gave him time to work on his surprise. He'd found the ring in Claire's jewelry box while helping Sarah organize the bedroom. A note in Claire's handwriting had been wrapped around it for the woman brave enough to love him next. Even now she'd known. Even then, she'd planned for his future happiness. The ring needed sizing, and Jack had spent weeks studying jewelry work, determined to do this himself. Each hammer strike felt like a prayer, each careful adjustment a promise. Outside, snow melted. From the mountains in steady rivulets, as if nature herself approved of his intentions. The screen door creaked. Sarah, returning early, her Wednesday art class cancelled due to a school assembly. Jack quickly tucked the ring into his pocket, but not before she caught the gleam of gold. "Secret projects?" she asked, coming to kiss him hello. Her cheeks were flushed from the drive, her hair carrying the scent of spring wind. Something like, "That?" He pulled her close, still amazed at how naturally they fit together. How were the kids today? Full of spring fever. She laughed, settling into their evening routine. "But you should see their science projects. Remember those heritage seeds we started in the greenhouse? They're all germinating. The children are so proud." Jack smiled, thinking of the greenhouse now bursting with new life. Every morning before her drive to school, Sarah tended the seedlings. Every evening they checked their progress together. The simple ritual had become sacred, a daily reminder of growth and possibility. "Martha from the store asked about our summer plans," Sarah continued, watching him carefully. "Seems word has gotten out about your idea for educational ranch visits." "Our idea," Jack corrected. He'd been working with Sarah to develop programs that would combine her teaching expertise with his ranching knowledge. "Did you show her the curriculum outline?" "She loved it, said it's about time these mountains taught their children properly." Sarah paused, then added softly, "She also mentioned that Reverend Thompson has some openings in June for weddings." Jack's hand went to the ring in his pocket. "Did she now?" Sarah busied herself with her teaching notes, trying to sound casual. "Apparently the Valley Chapel is lovely that time of year. Wild roses everywhere." Jack crossed to where she stood, taking both her hands in his. "Sarah Winters, are you proposing to me?" Her laugh was bright as spring water. "Well, someone had to bring it up. You've been hiding in this workshop for weeks, pretending I haven't noticed you working on Grandmother Hawthorne's ring. Noticed that, did you?" "I'm a teacher, Jack. We notice everything." Her eyes softened. "But I was content to wait until you were ready." He pulled the ring from his pocket, its surface catching the late afternoon light. "Been ready for a while now, just wanted to do it right, make it perfect." "Perfect is overrated." Sarah touched the ring gently. "Look at us, a lonely cowboy and a stranded teacher brought together by a snowstorm. Nothing perfect about that story, but it's ours." Jack slipped the ring onto her finger, his grandmother's gold warm against Sarah's skin. "Could use some help. Running this place," he said gruffly, emotion making his voice rough. "Teaching those summer programs, keeping the greenhouse going, making it a home again. Is that your way of asking me to marry you?" Her eyes danced with amusement and love. "Suppose it is." He pulled her closer. "Though you seem to have already decided." "I decided the moment you opened Claire's letter." Sarah stretched up to kiss him softly. "When a man finally learns to listen to the wisdom of those who love him, he's worth keeping." Through the workshop window, they could see the last of winter, retreating from the mountains. In the greenhouse, Claire's heritage seeds were sprouting new life, and here, in this space that had once known only solitude, two hearts beat in sync with the rhythm of spring. "June, then?" Jack asked, his thumb brushing over the ring on her finger. "June," Sarah agreed, "when the wild roses bloom." They stood together in the lengthening light, planning their future in quiet words and gentle touches. The ring gleamed on Sarah's hand, carrying with it the love of generations past and the promise of generations to come. Outside, the mountains stood sentinel, unchanged yet witnessing change, as winter finally surrendered its long hold on the valley and on Jack Hawthorne's heart. The new mailbox caught the morning sun, its fresh paint gleaming against the weathered fence post. "Hawthorne and Winters Ranch Educational Center," it proclaimed in careful letters, with Jack and Sarah written beneath in a more personal touch. It was a small change, but one that symbolized everything that had transformed over the past months. Jack stood admiring it while waiting for the school bus to arrive. These days, the ranch regularly hosted student groups, turning the once silent property into a place of learning and discovery. Today's visitors would be Sarah's fifth graders, coming for their weekly hands-on science lesson. The sound of an approaching vehicle made him turn, but it wasn't the bus. It was Sarah's car, returning early from her morning prep work at school. She stepped out wearing the denim jacket he'd given her, her engagement ring catching the light as she waved. "Thought I'd better be here for this," she said, coming to stand beside him. "It's not every day we officially open the educational center." The past few months had been a whirlwind of preparation. The old bunkhouse had been converted into a classroom space, complete with microscopes and geological specimens. The barn now featured educational displays about ranching history, and the greenhouse had become a living laboratory for agricultural science. "Remember when you first suggested this?" Jack asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "Thought you were crazy, talking about turning a working ranch into a place of learning. And now?" She leaned into him, both of them watching dust rise from the approaching school bus on the horizon. "Now I'm wondering why we didn't think of it sooner." He gestured to the changes around them. "Claire would have loved this, teaching kids about the land, the history, the way things grow. She is teaching them through you." Sarah touched the locket she now wore alongside her own, Claire's last gift, found in the jewelry box, with a note asking that it be passed on to the woman who helps Jack find his way back to life. The bus crested the final hill, children's excited faces pressed against the windows. Many of them had been coming to the ranch for weeks now, helping plant the spring crops, learning about animal care, discovering the mysteries of geology in the surrounding rocks. "Mr. Jack, Miss Winters!" they called out as they descended from the bus, full of enthusiasm despite the early hour. One little girl clutched a carefully wrapped package. "We brought something for the ranch." Sarah knelt to accept the gift, unwrapping it carefully. Inside was a handmade sign, painted with children's art, "Where history meets future." Tears pricked at her eyes as she showed it to Jack. "This is perfect," he said, voice gruff with emotion. "Know just where to put it, too." They hung the sign near the entrance to the converted bunkhouse classroom, the children beaming with pride. Inside, the walls were covered with their artwork and science projects, detailed drawings of plant life cycles, careful observations of weather patterns, stories about ranch life past and present. "Today, we're learning about water conservation," Sarah announced, shifting into teacher mode. "Mr. Jack's going to show us the old rainwater collection system his grandfather built, and then we're going to design our own." The children clustered around Jack, their questions overlapping in their excitement. He caught Sarah's eye over their heads, remembering a time when the only sounds on this ranch were the wind and his own footsteps. Now it was alive with young voices, with discovery, with purpose. Later, after the lessons were done and the bus had departed, they stood together in the quiet of the greenhouse. The heritage seeds had grown into strong plants, their vegetables and flowers a testament to patience and care. Sarah was marking papers while Jack checked the irrigation system, a simple domestic scene that would have seemed impossible just months ago. "The Timber Creek Board called," Sarah said, looking up from her grading. "They want to make the ranch an official partner in their science curriculum. Year-round programs, not just special visits." Jack nodded, unsurprised. The success of their initial programs had exceeded everyone's expectations. "Guess we'll need to hire some help soon. Can't run a ranch, an educational center, and plan a wedding all on our own." "Speaking of the wedding," Sarah set down her papers. "Martha brought over some wild rose cuttings, said they'll bloom just in time for June." Jack looked around at the greenhouse Claire had loved so much, now renewed and repurposed. At the education center they'd built together, at the woman who had brought spring back to his world. Everything had changed, yet somehow everything that mattered had remained the same. The land, the legacy, the love of teaching and learning. The new mailbox caught the setting sun, its letters a promise to the future. Hawthorne and Winters, not an ending or a beginning, but a transformation, as natural as winter turning to spring. 1 year later, the kitchen refrigerator bore a colorful collection of children's artwork, scientific diagrams of plant growth, careful drawings of ranch animals, and thank-you notes from students whose lives had been touched by the Hawthorne and Winters Educational Center. Among them, slightly faded but still prominent, was the wedding photo taken in June beneath an arch of wild roses. Jack and Sarah's joy, as clear as the mountain sunshine behind them. The morning light streamed through windows that no longer bore the weight of solitude. Jack stood at the counter, preparing coffee just as he had that first morning when Sarah had entered his life. But now there were two mugs, worn and well-loved, one bearing a careful gold repair line where it had once been cracked. "Delivery's here," Sarah called from the front porch, where the morning mail had just arrived. She entered carrying a package and several letters, her grandmother Hawthorne's ring catching the light as she sorted through them. The new science curriculum materials arrived, and she paused, smile softening as she held up an envelope. "Look what Martha saved for us." It was a newspaper clipping from the Timber Creek Gazette, featuring a photograph of their latest student graduation ceremony. 20 young faces beamed from beneath junior ranger hats, holding certificates from their week-long summer education program. The headline read, "Ranch Program Transforms Local Education." "Hard to believe it's been a year," Jack said, wrapping his arms around her from behind as she read. Sarah leaned back against him. "Remember when you thought I was crazy for suggesting educational programs? Remember when you thought I'd never change?" She turned in his embrace, touching his cheek gently. "I never thought that. Suspected? Maybe. Worried occasionally. But I always knew you had it in you." The refrigerator art gallery had become something of a local legend. Parents reported their children begging to attend the ranch programs, not just for the hands-on learning, but for the chance to have their work displayed in what the kids called Mr. Jack's Museum of Discovery. "Got word from the State Education Board yesterday," Sarah said, accepting her coffee. "They want to use our program as a model for other rural areas, combining traditional ranching knowledge with modern educational techniques." Jack nodded, unsurprised. The success of their venture had exceeded even Sarah's optimistic projections. Claire would have loved that, using the old to teach the new. "She does love it," Sarah corrected gently. "Through every student who learns here, every life we touch." She gestured to Claire's locket, now a permanent part of her daily wear. "Through us." Outside, they could hear the first school bus of the day approaching. Their modest educational program had grown to include daily classes, weekend workshops, and special summer sessions. The old ranch had transformed into a living classroom where history, science, and future met in perfect harmony. "New group today?" Jack asked, though he knew her schedule by heart. 6th graders, geological survey. Sarah gathered her teaching materials. "Thought we'd start with your grandfather's rock collection, then take them up to the ridge where we found those fossils last spring." Jack watched her prepare for the day, her movements sure and purposeful. The past year had changed them both, his edges softened by love and purpose, her theoretical knowledge enriched by practical experience. Together, they'd built something neither could have created alone. "Got something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "Found it in the attic yesterday." He handed her a small, weathered journal. Opening it, Sarah discovered Claire's handwriting. "Ranch Teaching Ideas," dated from 20 years ago. "She had the same dream," Jack said softly. "Using the ranch to educate, to inspire, just never got the chance to make it happen." Sarah traced the faded words carefully. "Then we're not just building our future, are we? We're building hers too, all of ours." The sound of children's voices drifted through the windows as the bus arrived. Soon the quiet morning would transform into a day full of discovery and learning. But for now, in this moment, they stood in the kitchen where their story had begun, surrounded by the artwork of young minds they'd helped shape. "Ready for another day of changing lives?" Sarah asked, gathering her things. Jack looked at their home, at the refrigerator gallery, at the repaired coffee mug, at the woman who had taught him that love wasn't about replacing the past, but building upon it. At the life they'd created together, as rich and complex as the layers of rock in their beloved mountains. "With you?" He smiled, taking her hand. always. Outside, the mountains stood watch as they had for generations, their ancient faces bearing witness to this newest chapter in the ranch's long story. And somewhere, in the whisper of wind through spring flowers, in the laughter of children discovering their world, in the endless cycle of seasons and change, Claire's dream lived on, not ended, but transformed like winter yielding to eternal spring.